So, welcome to all. Thank you for being here. With Professor Konarzewski conference, the cycle dedicated to national scientific academies in Europe and National Scientific Academy and the future of Europe ends. Professor Konarzewski is a prominent biologist and president of the Polish Academy of Sciences, as you know. So we have a closing of the cycle that could not be more important and significant in this moment of European history. The President will tell us about science, diplomacy, and the future of the European science, a theme of fundamental importance. We thank the President very much for accepting the invitation, and we give him the floor. Thank you.
Mr. President, Mr. Ambassador, dear ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I am absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to deliver a short presentation on science diplomacy, and I must say that I am slightly nervous because I will deliver this lecture in front of a true diplomat, Mr. Ambassador Robert Schnepp, who was my former boss for quite some time when I served as a science advisor at our embassy in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for sharing this few moments with us and with me, myself. And it's a great opportunity that I can speak on science diplomacy, not only to fellow researchers, but also to diplomatic corps. Ladies and gentlemen, why science diplomacy? To some extent, I have just explained it. I was a part of diplomatic corps for quite a while, and so I touched this with my own hands, and I have quite a lot of experience. But I follow suit a number of researchers turned to diplomats, or at least those that try to do so, and I think that this is a fundamental experience and fundamental tool for both the research community, but also the community of those that make such a bold decisions today. And I think that science has a lot to say and a lot to contribute to what is going on between different countries and also globally. Let me just start by remarking that science diplomacy has always been a tool of diplomacy, even at the time when science diplomacy as such didn't exist as a separate discipline. And the most significant and prime example of it is the development of political relations between China and the United States in early 60s and 70s. And we bear fruits of this relation right now. It's an easy relation, as you know. But at the very beginning of this relation, we had two really important points. First, early 60s, when science diplomacy preempted development of economic relations between the US and Japan. And this was a kind of a springboard where the Japanese and Americans learned how to do it. And then with a great success, it was implemented in the early 70s when science diplomacy paved way to the development of economic relations between US and China. And at that point, the American government realized that the might of American science could be used to some extent in projection of American interests. So science was a tool or become a tool of really skilled American diplomacy. And from then, other countries followed suit and tried to use science diplomacy as a tool for international relations. Same applies to European Union and to other countries as well. This will be a part of my talk. But first and foremost, let's reflect on scientists as diplomats. Are we good diplomats or not? What to do and what makes a good scientist a good diplomat and vice versa? Well, it's not that easy. Let me just bring to your attention a very recent editorial from Nature. Train scientists to advise government. Yes, this is something that we all need very badly these days. And the caveat is, as you see in the highlight, a great scientist doesn't necessarily make it an effective science advisor. So this is a toolbox that can be learned, but not everybody is well fit to use this toolbox. And particularly those that are good scientists are not necessarily good advisors. We have to bear it in mind because sometimes both the scientists themselves but also decision makers think that just picking up a really outstanding scientist and making him or her a science advisor will fit the bill, which is not the case. And what to do and under what circumstances it is possible will also absorb me and your attention for a couple of minutes. And it's best to explain just setting the stage and just reflecting on the decision-making process. And of course, in a theory, it's very simple, and every decision-making process is just a kind of a circle where we have a rising awareness of a problem to be solved. We define this problem, we identify the options of solutions, then select the policy, implement this policy, evaluate the outcomes, and eventually, reiterating this process, we'll come up with the final outcome, which hopefully is something that resolved the problem in the first place. But in reality, this is completely messy, and this is not a simple task, and every politician knows that this is actually a web of relations that makes policy making so difficult and sometimes absolutely difficult to govern. And within this really complicated picture, the science advice should fit. And where is the place for scientists to advise, both internally and internationally? More or less, what we can provide to decision makers is evidential input. And this is our first task, to be the presenters and honest brokers of the knowledge we have that is evidence-based. And all we can do is to hope that this evidence knowledge will be accepted by the politicians and then turned into decision-making process and embedded into decision-making process. And by the way, of course, if that's successful, then we can also hope that science itself will be regarded as an essential tool of making policy, but also of making the country strong. So the science as such should be the engine of or driver of the change, cultural change, but also economic change, which is unfortunately not always the case. So science advice is not always equivalent to making science as such an important piece of internal or international policy. But what we can do, all we can do is to save the integrity of science, be as honest brokers as possible, and hope the best in front of the politicians with whom we interact. And to give a prime example on how difficult it might be, let me bring to your attention a key figure of recent years that I'm absolutely confident that you recognize, and this is Dr. Anthony Fauci, who used to be the advisor to the President Trump in his first term. And this was absolutely uneasy and really complicated story that Dr. Fauci recently described in his book. This is just out a month ago. On Call, a doctor's journey in public service. I strongly advise you to read. This is really a fantastic account on all difficulties that people dealing with the high-ranking politicians can encounter. And this is a special case. I mean, President Trump, just to write two short excerpts from the book, Dr. Fauci on several occasions remarked on President Trump with stressing that there was no antipathy on his side to the president. And, well, it was not reciprocated by the president, and on several occasions, President Trump remarked on Dr. Fauci as a disaster. Well, we know that the integrity of Dr. Fauci, his stance on several issues, particularly those related to COVID-19 pandemics, was absolutely right. He was absolutely trying to deliver the best of the knowledge we had. Of course, this does not mean that we didn't make mistakes. Everybody made mistakes. I mean, in each and every country, we can now point afterwards to several decisions that probably were not right. But nevertheless, those that were advised to the president were the best that could be delivered by science, taking into account the knowledge that we had at the moment. And I must admit that I really admire Dr. Fauci for his scientific integrity, because I know how difficult it is to face a high-ranking politician and tell to him or her, well, sir, you're not right, and then explain why is that the case. And I believe, and that's what Dr. Fauci describes in his book, that saying that the president is wrong to Mr. Trump was not easy. But this is something that we have to be prepared as a scientist if we are, let me say it again, the honest brokers to the decision makers. We have to deliver it, even though we know that probably this won't be the message that is well anticipated and according to, let's say, expectations. And that's the problem. But the problem is even more complicated, because this was not President Trump himself. He was not convinced on several accounts. This was also the mistrust of science that we faced during the COVID-19 pandemics, but we still face. So this T-shirt that I embedded in between two photos, Fauci lied, people died, you can still buy it on eBay and some other internet pages. And this was unfortunately quite spread among the Americans, and not only. I mean, this mistrust to science is something that is always a problem, and particularly when we deal with the problems that are well known to the public. Because any narrow scientific conversation, of course, this is something that we can sort in ourselves. But when we deal with the public, then the problem gets really, really serious. So this is something that science diplomacy and science advising must face, and this is something that we don't do well as a scientific community. Let's admit it. So that's why we need the training, how to convince the people, because we know by themselves that we are right on many accounts, but providing these arguments that are compelling and convincing is the most difficult part of the job as a science advisor and as a part of science diplomacy. Well, just to give you an example of it, expert credibility on climate change. This is one of the issues that we face all the time. And I just picked one example. This is the paper from PNAS from a couple of years ago, where a bunch of authors compared the stance of those that openly publicize their views on the anthropogenic climate change. So they simply divided the scientists into two cohorts. Those that are here, can I use the pointer? Yes, I can. Those that were unconvinced are marked in black, and those convinced are marked in an open symbol. And here you have a number of publications, from 100 to 900, so some of these scientists are really prolific. And here the number of researchers that represent the number of publications on that matter, I mean on climate change. And look where those that are unconvinced are lumped. At the very beginning of this x-axis, that means that most of the people that are unconvinced are those that don't publish much or that publish very little on climate change. But still they are very vocal, and they are still very, very visible in the public space. Those that are really knowledgeable, and they account for as much as 98% of the scientific community that works with the subject, those are convinced. But still, in a public debate, we have a situation where this unbalanced number of, let's say, researchers that are knowledgeable on the subject is absolutely far from being reflected in a public debate, and that's the problem. Most of the time, and this is the way that most of the debates these days are organized, we have a topic of debate, and then we have a symmetry between two parties that present, let's say, contradictory views. So this is pretty much like this. The problem, however, is that if you invite two scientists that would, let's say, be contradictory with regard to their stance on anthropogenic factors of climate change, and if we follow this proportion that I have just described, the proportion of time, just consider the time that could be devoted to this debate, would be pretty much like this figure to this figure. But this is totally distorted in a public debate, because most of the time, just to have the debate to go on, we have two contracting views with a time, equal sharing of time, which is, as I said, completely unfit to this lumping of those that are unconvinced but have very little, if any, let's say, scientific experience on the subject. So this is the problem of our own community, that unfortunately very few of us are willing to engage in the public debate, but also very few of us are willing to engage in public diplomacy and science advising, which I equalize to each other. So the first take-home message from my presentation is that we should blame themselves first and foremost as a scientific community at large, that we are not as well perceived in these most concrete topics of today, name it either a COVID-19 pandemic or the climate change. We don't do a good job on engaging in explaining both decision makers but also the public our arguments. So first and foremost, we have to be more engaged, and I'm absolutely confident that your academy is very much engaged, as our academy. But for whatever reason, and this is something to be discussed, we can't really rally the scientific community to be as engaged as we should be at the moment. Okay, that's another problem. The problem is that those that are eventually engaged in science advising and science diplomacy, most of the time come from some narrow disciplines or fields of science. I am myself a biologist. But science is, as you know, it's a very broad cause, and to be a good advisor, one has to have a good command of both humanities, social sciences, and of course, at least a bit of each and every important part of natural sciences. This is not easy. And of course, you can't be an expert on everything. But the kernel of let's say, of virtue here is to have this ability to pick those parts of each and every field that is really essential to the problem that we face. And I have just alluded to the public perception of science and misinterpretation of science. And again, we do have a very good understanding why this misconception and misperception of scientific facts is distributing so widely. And there are very, very wonderful publications on that, but we learned from it so little. Just one example, over a decade ago, I came across a number of studies by Dr. Michał Kosiński, who is a Polish researcher working from many years at Stanford. And he's a psychologist, social psychologist. So that's the discipline quite removed from what I'm doing on a daily basis. But nevertheless, when I came across this very paper, this was published in 2013 in PNAS, I just was intrigued by the title itself. Private traits and attributes are predictable from digital records of human behavior. Come on. If we can somehow learn what drives us in a simple way, well, I hope you admit that this is not only intriguing, but dangerous. And then there was another paper by Kosiński and colleagues, computer-based personality judgments, again from PNAS. And the personality judgments are more accurate than those made by humans, computer-based personality judgments. What they did, they developed very simple algorithm based on linear combination of several scores gleaned from Facebook. And then it turned out that this linear, fairly simple combination of several scores predicts somebody's preferences, including political preferences, as good as the closest friends and family of this person in question. Isn't it amazing? We are so complicated, but at the same time, so simple and so easy to manipulate. And this was a landmark paper to me at the time. I was so impressed by this paper that I remember I wrote a note on it. At the time, I was still with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I wrote a note alarming to some extent, because this was the time for the time of Brexit, that might be something that is a potential tool of ground manipulation. And indeed, that happened. Let me remind you, Cambridge Analytica, this was a small enterprise that, well, they never admitted it, but most likely they used this algorithm developed by Kosiński and colleagues to manipulate the public debate on Brexit, but also to manipulate the public debate on the first pre-election time in the US. And there seems to be that in the US, at least, there was 80 million people affected by this kind of manipulation, and roughly 120 million people affected in Europe worldwide, but particularly in the UK during the Brexit debate. So just think of it, how much of the influence science can have if this is misused in a sense. And as long as we are at least aware of it, we can try to bring this to the attention of the decision makers and try to make a good use of it, at least under those circumstances where this can be a kind of a, let's say, state emergency type of thing. And this is something that probably was a lesson learned, because let me remind you, just recently the outcome of the presidential election in Romania. It was the first term was very heavily disputed, and it turned out that this was also very heavily influenced by this time TikTok, the platform that is of a very specific origin, I would say. So this is again a good example of the influence that once we are aware of, we can somehow try to at least preempt some really bad developments that ended up as a kind of manipulation. Well, this is not the end. This is the beginning of our problems, because then we have not only the algorithms that we have to learn, and then at least to learn their significance and then communicate to our peers, but we also have new actors on this scene that have never been so significant before. And there are two, I would say, groups of actors that we have to deal with as science advisors and as a part of diplomacy. First are the very strong key figures of the political debate, and of course the most significant example of today is Elon Musk, and he's most likely a very significant influence on US foreign policy through his leadership of the Department of Governmental Efficiency under President Trump. So we'll see in a few months how this works. But just bear in mind, we have a single person so powerful that we, and what is most important here is that person that comes from our circles, in fact, because he considers himself, quite rightly, the representative of, let's say, scientific technocratic world. But he uses this influence in a way that I'm afraid might bring some difficulties in the nearest future. Well, it already had some repercussions. Elon Musk was elected as the foreign member of the Royal Society in 2018 on the account of his achievements in engineering, particularly in the development of the technologies that are indeed quite tremendous. But at the same time, his stance on science, and not only, caused a big stir in the in the UK. And here you have an example of Professor of one of the members of the Royal Society that resigned, just opposing the membership of Elon Musk and what he has done to let's say, forward his views in the recent years. This is Professor Dorothy Bishop, one of the outstanding figures of the Royal Society. She stepped down. She resigned from the membership of the Royal Society as a member because she didn't want to, let's say, continue his membership with Elon Musk as a fellow. This is not only a strong personalities like Musk. We have also another huge problem to be solved, and this problem is named big pharma, or you name it, big technologies that are now encircled in international huge business enterprises. And one of the prime examples is Novo Nordisk. And as you see, the market value now of Novo Nordisk is over almost 60 billion US dollars, and this is bigger than the Danish economy. Well, so should we deal with Danish kingdom or should we deal with Novo Nordisk? And again, this is the enterprise that is funded on science. They made this fortune on two or maybe three absolute blockbusters, as you know, so maybe we'll get rid of the problem of obesity, which I doubt. But nevertheless, Novo Nordisk indeed is the key player, and not only Novo Nordisk. So again, who could tackle this? Who could understand what is going on behind it? Of course, the scientists. We ourselves. We know how it works, and we would be the best science advisors to the government, both, again, internally and internationally. But we have to be aware of it, and we have to use this understanding of the problem and hope that our peers will be receptive to think about Novo Nordisk and other as a key partner on the level of independent states, at least in terms of economical leverage, that's for sure. Well, coming back to more internal problems that are now international as well, let me give you an example of science, diplomacy, and science at best in terms of a real crisis. And we in Poland face this crisis because we are neighboring Ukraine, and we do our best since over 2 years to help our Ukrainian colleagues. And I don't spare any opportunity to rally to bring this to the attention, the need of saving Ukrainian science. This is something in action. Yes, this is not only the diplomacy, because we have to convince someone to help Ukrainians. We do it as I speak. So to this day, we helped over 1,000 Ukrainian researchers. We supported them with a total budget of over 8 million euros. You are more than welcome to have a look at this report that was published just 2 months ago. This is freely available from our website. And to give just a few concrete examples, just from the finance that came from the US, we allocated over $8 million to our Ukrainian colleagues. We formed 18 research teams that work both in Poland and in Ukraine. We don't want to drain Ukrainians from Ukraine. We want to help them in their home countries. This financing goes for 3 years, and we partnered in this effort with the US National Academies, and this is our major partner, and the Americans are bringing money to us, and the money comes from different donors from the US, but we also have a help from Royal Society, Academia, Sinica, Leopoldina, and of course, if you have any opportunity to help Ukrainians, we'll be more than happy to facilitate this. So this is something very concrete that we need to tackle, and I'm afraid that this is the problem that will stay with us for quite a while. Even if war will be over next year, then the problem of rebuilding Ukrainian science is still with us. So this is something that we should all consider, just for the benefit of Ukrainians, but also for the benefit of all of us. The strong Ukraine means safe Europe, that's for sure, and we should do our best to help Ukraine in this cause. Well, of course, the problem that we share, I mean, Italy as well as Poland, is a problem of of immigrants. You have this terrible problem of immigration, influx of immigrants from Mediterranean. We have a different problem, but still of the same kind, the influx of immigrants coming over from Belarus, and that's something that is a part of, let's say, this dirty war waged by Putin. But if you have a look at this as a scientific problem, it's clear that the source of the problem is not political one, but the source of the problem is somewhere else, and these are, again, the global climate change. This is just one figure from the paper published in Science showing the simple relationship between average temperature in a given location and the number of asylum applicants from the place with this particular temperature. And as you see, it's really rising with the temperature in a tremendous way. So this is the real problem. So as long as we have this increase of temperatures, the influx of asylum seekers will not be over. Even if we stop the war in Ukraine, we'll still have the problem, and we have to try to find the solution. But first and foremost, we have to communicate the simple truth to the politicians, the scientists, what to do, how to convince them that this is something that is far beyond just physically stopping people from immigration. Same applies for the US-Mexico border. That's the same problem. This is not the problem of just stopping people, but rather remedying the very cause of it, which in this case is the climate change. Let me then bring you an example that is close to my heart of public diplomacy and the problem that we have just in the context of immigration. This is the fairly simplified map of the Białowieża forest, by the way. That's the home to quite a number of really sneaky predators called lynx that is so close to your heart. And I used to work in Białowieża for quite a while, and I had on several occasions I had the opportunity to spot this elusive animal. But this is not about the lynx. This is about the border between Belarus and Poland here. This is Białowieża, and this is the border that now is the battleground of immigration. And again, the problem won't be solved immediately, but we can think of a subtle way of playing, let's say, science to maybe at some point start a discussion with the Belarusians on easing this relationship when the conditions permits. As for now, the border looks like this. We built a really solid barrier, as you see, just to stop people coming. But of course, this stops not only people, but stops everything, including animals. And maybe I'll just come back for a second, if I may. Yes, let me remind you that this is the forest is just an integral environment, integral ecosystem, and this is artificially divided by this horrible wall. So, of course, from the point of view of anything related to animal protection, to everything what we would cherish, and let me remind you that this is the UNESCO property. This is the Transboundary National Park that should be, in principle, managed by Poles and Belarusians, and we did it for decades, and now it's gone. So, of course, there is a need on both sides to come back to this place as it was designed and protected for centuries as a single entity, now so utterly divided by this wall. And of course, the consequences are really dire. Let me just give you one example that is well summarized in this short note from Science, but I think that this photo speaks for itself better than any article. This is the European bison, the flagship animal living in this forest, trapped in the barbed wire. That's what is going on. That's what's happening there. And of course, this hurts the heart of every naturalist, every human, I think. And what can we do? Well, maybe at some point, hopefully in the near future, we can start to discuss this matter with Belarusians, saying, hey, we should do our best to restore this integrity of the Belarusian, of the Białowieża forest. So maybe you consider to stop the influx of immigrants, and we consider to remove parts of this horrible barrier so the animals could move freely. Well, we'll see. This is not the right time to discuss this at the moment, but maybe in a few months' time, maybe in a year or so, that will be, I think, a really good idea to think about something that I just called the bison diplomacy. That will be the litmus test of the true intentions of Belarusians. Maybe. So as you see, we have a very good reason to consider this as one of the tools of using science and using the common experience of those that cherish nature, just to start to bring this to normality, where now we have a really almost open war. Well, to set the stage for a few minutes on a even wider ground, I was very much impressed by the report developed by your former Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, and I think that this really shook the waves that it permeated through not only scientific circles is quite incredible. Yes, we are lagging behind in Europe in many respects with regard to innovation and everything that should be the driving force of our economy and the whole continent, particularly when we consider European Union as an integral part of it. Well, okay, what can we do with that? Do we have sufficient will and sufficient skills and sufficient tools to foster scientific advance of Europe, and by this can we try to leverage European Union vis-a-vis our partners in these troubling times? I mean, China and the US in the first place. Well, this is again a big battleground for science, and we are losing it, as you know, because the European budget with regard to science is far below our expectations. But we do have a few tools that probably could make a difference if we use it more rightly and properly. But before I come to this, just I couldn't resist to put this slide just to demonstrate how much one can benefit from being the member of European Union. This is the graph from the paper that I published a number of years ago. Oops, I'm sorry. This was unintentional. No. Let me come back. Yes. So we have on the x-axis, we have just the years from 1996 to 2012. Here we have the growth of gross domestic expenditure on R&D in Poland. And here we have a number of Poles that applied for, Poles, I mean the Polish researchers, applying for permanent stay in the US. And the most important part of it is the year 2004. This is the year of Polish accession to European Union. Look at what happened after this year. this is a really tremendous growth, even though we complain in Poland all the time. But the difference is absolutely tremendous. And the number of applications of Poles that wanted to stay in the US for good just plummeted. So I can't think of any better example and evidence of what we can get from the European Union, even though we are all complaining about, let's say, the regulations and so on and so forth. So Poland, I think, is a prime example of the success that the European Union as a construct, how it marked the current history of Europe. So back to the tools we have in the toolbox of Europe. I think that the success story is this prime example, and this is European Research Council. I believe that this is the way to go. The problem is that the budget of ERC in the upcoming FP10 is again very, very low. And we should blame it to ourselves again. And this is because we didn't do much, I think, as a scientific community to persuade, again, the decision makers in Brussels, but not only, to leverage the budget of European Research Council. We have discussed this more than a month ago when the president of ERC, Professor Maria Leptin, here in this photo, visited us in Warsaw, and we were hoping for good news, but now there seems that ERC is still not as well funded as it should be. We are particularly affected by it because, as you see, there's different colors. Poland, the green, is in a level of very few successful ERC applications. You are in the better part of Europe already. So I congratulate you on this, but we have to catch up, and we won't catch up unless the budget of ERC is increased. So the coherency of European Union is far from being successful, and this is one of the reasons why I think we should leverage our expectations and appeal to the decision makers in more effective way. Well, again, yet another good example of the success, the EU Joint Program on Neurodegenerative Disease Research, JP&D. It's open to everybody, just like ERC. So why not to make it even wider and more attractive to everybody else from different parts of the world, so we attract the best and brightest to Europe rather than lose them to the outside world? Again, this is up to us, and unfortunately we are far from being successful. And the last success story, well, not the very last, that I would just briefly comment on, this is CERN. You know it all. This is something that makes Europe so attractive. So again, this is a wonderful place to have here in this continent and attract people from elsewhere. Just like something that may solve our future problems with regards to our need for energy, the ITER, and ongoing problems, of course, with the 39 nations trying to build together this tokamak in France, but maybe that will be a solution, again, here in Europe. So we do have the assets, but we are still lagging behind. This is yet another photo on the scale. Just look at the scale of this enterprise. Really amazing. Should we be as open as possible in this undertaking? Not really. That's again a big problem to be discussed. This is just a short excerpt from the paper recently published by two eminent figures of science diplomacy, von Turikian, who was the former science advisor to the US Secretary of State, and Peter Gluckman, who was the science advisor to the Prime Minister of New Zealand. But both gentlemen are still very active in this field, and I have a privilege to know both and work with them. By the way, von Turikian was and still is an instrumental figure behind this $8 million aid that was brought to Ukrainians from U.S. National Academy of Sciences. But I just want you to have a look at this bold statement, as open as possible and as closed as necessary. That's the problem that we face. And of course, small wonder, there is at least one partner that fits the bill, and this is China. And we are lacking, I mean, in Europe, we are still lacking, let's say, very clear policy towards China. Should we still be as open as we were, or should we consider this country as a, let's say, not maybe an immediate threat, but someone that should be cautiously considered as a partner for scientific research. And well, this is a little bit more complicated story, as you know, because from other hand we have Taiwan, a small island. I just visited it a couple of weeks ago, and then immediately after I had the privilege to meet the Vice Minister for Science of the People's Republic of China. So the Chinese are very vigilant, and every time when someone meets with high representatives of Taiwan, then there is a Chinese reaction, almost immediate. But how can we deal with this? Again, without, let's say, the knowledge and the science diplomacy core, we won't be able to develop an integrated response towards this issue in Europe. And I don't know how it is in Italy, but we do have this problem in Poland, that's for sure. We don't have any coherent policy towards China, I mean, with regard to scientific cooperation. It's let's say, still something in its infancy, and the problem is growing, as you know, particularly in AI, in those, let's say, applications that are very sensitive to let's say, dual use, as it's called. And the final frontier that is very close to my heart, and these are polar politics. By definition, this is international. This is something where the science diplomacy, science advising is just absolutely essential to develop any international cooperation and solution to the grand problem on how to deal with increasing influence of specific countries. Up north, this is Russia, as you know. The Russians claim quite a big chunk of the North Pole and the surrounding areas to themselves. Well, the Southern Pole is a little bit more nuanced, but still there are a number of countries, as you see, that claim their sovereignty over parts of Antarctica. And once the ice is melted down, then of course this problem surfaces even more. So here, without, let's say, the scientific grounds, we won't address the problem on how to manage this commonly. And the Antarctic Treaty is obviously not enough now to handle this. Let me remind you that Poland is very, very active in this area. We have, actually, the Polish Academy of Sciences have two polar stations. One is up north on Svalbard, the other one is in Antarctica. This is this lower one. It will be completed because this is still, let's say, under construction, but we will open it again next year, and this is our polar station up north, close to my heart because I did my PhD there, so I know the place quite well. And on that note, let me remind you that we'll have an International Polar Year in the year 2032-33, so there will be a very good opportunity to reunite again our efforts to solve the problems related to polar research. And let me remind you that polar regions, particularly north, is absolutely critical for the global climate change. So if we don't understand what is going on there, we won't understand what is going with the global climate. And this is something that actually gathered just yesterday the community of polar researchers from Italy and from Poland. We had a wonderful workshop at the Polish station here in Rome. So thank you very much. We have the director of our station with us, and this was a wonderful opportunity to listen to the joint presentations of Poles and Italians. So we have quite a lot in common, even in such an exotic places like Svalbard. And this is a wonderful, wonderful news that I would like to share with you. So with that, let me briefly conclude saying that we have a lot to, as a scientific community, we have a lot to offer to decision makers, and it's unfortunately not used well, and the main reason is ourselves. We still are far from being as persuasive as we should be, not only to advise the decision makers, but also to bring our calls to them, and then to expect that once they realize how important it is, they will allocate more money to us. And in between, of course, we have to address this not to the politicians, but rather to those that vote for politicians, so to the public. And still, this is something that is far from perfect, not only internally. I am speaking for Poland, but probably you share this problem also in Italy. Definitely we share this problem in European Union. So with that, let me conclude. This is the old town of Warsaw by night, with a small joke. There is still no palm tree there, but with the global warming, probably we'll have palm trees in Warsaw as well, just like you have them here in Rome. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.